The air is still in Gloucester, Massachusetts, that pre-dawn hour. It hangs heavy with the scent of diesel and brine over a harbor packed with in a quiet galley, a wall calendars. Edges are curled, marking the end of October. On our bulkhead, a barometer needle creeps steadily left. It's a subtle shift. A quiet warning. Miles away, in Boston, NOAA marine forecaster stares at a digital map. Streaks of falling pressure bloom across the screen, a silent cascade of red and orange. He's watching the numbers, but he feels it in his gut. Back in Gloucester, a crew is loading ice and bait. Ropes, cold and stiff, burn against their hands as they work. The coffee in their mugs has gone bitter. One of the boats bears a name that will soon become a memorial. The radio squawks, a garbled transmission that no one answers right away. The silence that follows feels heavier than the call itself. What's happening is an atmospheric chess game, played out over thousands of miles of ocean. Far to the south, the remnants of Hurricane Grace are bleeding moisture into the Atlantic, a ghost of a storm still potent with energy. From Canada, a sharp trough of cold, dense winter air is diving south, a blade cutting through the atmosphere. And over the Grand Banks, a small, unassuming La Presa system is gathering strength, feeding on the stark contrast between the warm Gulf Stream waters and the cold Canadian air. It's a kind of collision that can birth a monster. Forecasters see the pieces moving into place. They see the potential for a catastrophic merger. But out on the water, the fishermen hear only a simple, familiar word on the marine radio. Gale. A routine warning, delivered over a frequency that crackles and fades with distance. Let's meet the players on this board. There's a veteran Gloucester captain, weathered and resolute, pushing his vessel east. He's chasing one last big catch before the season turns for good, before the winter gales make the banks impassable. In Boston, there's the NOAA forecaster, a man who has learned to read the lines on a weather map like a doctor reading a pulse. And right now, he feels this storm's pulse quicken into a dangerous rhythm. Further down the coast, a Coast Guard rescue swimmer is practicing hoist maneuvers, dangling from a helicopter beneath a sky the color of lead. He has no idea what's brewing over the horizon, what he'll soon be asked to fly into. And then there's a couple aboard a modest sailboat named Satori. They trusted a forecast that promised a clear window for their passage south. Now, they stand on deck, watching the ocean swell. The waves growing strangely tall and spaced far apart, an unsettling liquid landscape. This isn't melodrama, it's meteorology. It is the science of what happens when a warm core system like a hurricane meets a cold core system like a nor'easter. The pressure gradient tightens, squeezing the isobars together on the map like a fist. The storm undergoes what forecasters call bomb cyclogenesis. Its central pressure plummets so fast it is like a stone dropped in water, deepening with terrifying speed. But here's the missing piece. The reason the storm is so uniquely treacherous. There's no single name for it. It isn't just a hurricane. It isn't just a nor'easter. It's a hybrid, a nameless monster. Mariners know how to handle hurricanes. They know how to brace for nor'easters. They don't know this. They have no frame of reference for the fury that is about to be unleashed. The warnings are there, if you know how to read them. A distant weather buoy, hundreds of miles offshore, begins logging wave periods that are lengthening, a sign of immense energy moving through the deep ocean. Along the coast, seasoned lobstermen, reading the sky and the sea, start pulling their traps early, retreating to the safety of the harbors. In his office, the NOAA forecaster drafts a new marine weather statement. He deliberately uses plain, urgent English, fighting the impulse to type the word that keeps echoing in his mind. Perfect. The sky is the wrong color, a sickly, bruised yellow-gray. The ocean itself feels different, alive in a way that silences even the most experienced sailors. The computer models, from different agencies and running different algorithms, all begin to agree. It's the forecaster's worst nightmare and a moment of terrifying certainty. The La Presa system won't just explode in intensity. It's going to absorb the remnant energy of Hurricane Grace, becoming a gargantuan vortex of wind and water. And then, it's predicted to do something almost no storm ever does. Instead of moving out to sea, it will perform a retrograde motion slow, deadly hook back towards the New England coast. It's a storm that will not pass. It's a storm that will return. Despite the darkening forecast, the Gloucester captain shoves the throttles forward, his boat's engines digging in, pushing him further into the looming danger. The forecaster, sleepless and worn, wipes a hand down his face, the glow of the screen reflecting in his tired eyes. And out past the tip of Cape Ann, beyond the relative safety of the land, the horizon begins to lift, the sea rising up to meet the sky. October 30th, 1991. The storm detonates over the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. It's no longer just weather. It's a living thing. The wind doesn't just blow. It howls through rigging, a high, thin scream of tortured steel. Green water, solid and heavy, doesn't just splash against the wheelhouse. It climbs the glass like a predator trying to get in. On the sailboat Satori, a solid tick handrail, thick as a man's arm, snaps with a single sharp crack that's swallowed by the roar. Bike on shore in a quiet NOAA office. The only sound is the chatter of printers spitting out weather charts. On the paper, isobars, the lines of equal pressure, are knitting themselves into impossibly tight rings. The center of the storm is a dark, angry knot. What was happening out there wasn't just a storm. It was an anomaly, a Frankenstein's monster of meteorology. So, why was this one different? Think of two massive gears turning in the atmosphere. The first gear is a classic nor'easter, a cold core low-pressure system spinning down from the north. The second gear is the remnants of Hurricane Grace, a tropical cyclone full of warm, moist air churning up from the south. Usually, when cold air meets warm air, the storm weakens. But this time they didn't just meet. The jet stream, a high-altitude river of wind, slammed them together. The gears jammed, their teeth interlocking. Instead of dying out, this new hybrid began to feed on the extreme temperature contrast, growing stronger with every rotation. It was a perfect alignment of a powerful jet streak, a sharp baroclinic zone, and warm ocean waters. Forecasters watched their models with a growing sense of dread. Their language, usually so precise, started to fail them. They wrote, seas building, hurricane force gusts possible. But how do you communicate the sheer violence of what's coming? What single word do you use to tell a mariner, don't be there? As the seas build, choices become everything. On the Gloucester fishing vessel, Andrea Gale, the captain weighs his options. He'd promised his crew good fishing, the kind that makes a trip worthwhile. Turning for home now means breaking that promise. The crew pretends not to watch his face, but every eye is on him, waiting for the call. Miles away, a rescue swimmer's pager vibrates violently against his hip. Distress calls are flooding in from multiple vessels offshore. In the ready room, pilots and crew chiefs are doing grim calculations of fuel ranges and personnel. The sky outside is a low, menacing gray ceiling that seems to press down on the very earth. And in that NOAA office, a forecaster argues with his superiors. The models are screaming hurricane force winds, but the system isn't technically a hurricane. It doesn't have a warm core. Policy is a quiet, unyielding wall. But the need for a clear warning, the danger to the people out on the water, is a deafening roar on the other side of it. Out on the open ocean, theory becomes terrifying reality. Long-period swells, generated hundreds of miles away, are now marching across the Grand Banks. But here, they stack up into jagged, unpredictable pyramids of water. Wave trains from different directions cross each other, their peaks shearing off, their energy combining to create rogue waves, vertical walls of water that stand taller than any boat. Radar screens on the few remaining vessels bloom with the clutter of sea spray and snow, becoming useless. A Canadian weather buoy, built to withstand anything, transmits one last, shocking piece of data before going silent. It has measured a single wave, cresting over 30 meters 100 feet in the chaos. On a deck somewhere in the maelstrom, a deckhand fastens a lucky charm to a steel bulkhead and forces a laugh that has no humor in it. In the cockpit of a sailboat, a sailor's breath fogs the inside of his foul-weather hood. His hands, numb with cold, find the zipper of his survival suit by muscle memory alone, a practiced motion for the unthinkable. The forecaster in the weather office hears himself say the word retrograde to a Kalia term for a storm moving backward against the prevailing winds. The word tastes wrong. Storms don't do that. But this one does. As its central pressure plunges to record lows, the winds wrap tighter and tighter. In the heart of the violence, an eye-like feature begins to form. A deceptive lull, surrounded by a ring of unimaginable fury. Then, defying all climatology, all logic, the massive system stops its eastward trek. It hesitates, and then begins to drift west. Back toward the coast. Back toward the boats that thought they could run from it. The boats that now have no exit. The sky and horizon have vanished, swallowed by a night that came at noon. Out there, the Gloucester boat, Asterisk. Andrea Gale Asterisk is climbing a sheer, black wall of water, then plunging into a hollow that feels bottomless. A sickening crack echoes from the stern. A voice tries to form a mayday, but the antenna whips into the churning sea, and the sentence shatters into static. This isn't just one storm. It's a monster made of three. A dying hurricane from the south, a low-pressure system from the north, and a blast of cold air from the west have collided over the Atlantic. It's a meteorological impossibility, a perfect storm. As the Asterisk Andrea Gale Asterisk fights for its life, the rescue chain sputters into action. An Air National Guard helicopter claws its way into the gale. Fuel margins. The pilots count seconds between the towering wave tops, searching for a single moment to hover. A single moment of calm that doesn't exist. From port, the Coast Guard cutter Asterisk. Tamaroa Asterisk shoulders its way out, its bow disappearing entirely under curtains of green water. Every person aboard knows this isn't a drill. You can't practice for a storm like this. Baek in Buston, a meteorologist, stares at his screens, his face illuminated by the ghostly glow. The buoy reports are off the charts. The satellite imagery looks like a photographic negative of hell. He's trying to diagram a storm that defies every textbook he's ever read. His phone rings, non-stopped, and he finds himself writing the same phrase over and over. Dangerous beyond experience. Out on the water, the rules of the sea have been read. Sailors trust their intuition, but intuition is based on experience, and no one has experienced this. They're facing rogue waves, born from a phenomenon called crossing seas. When wave systems from different storm fronts collide, they don't just add up. They can amplify each other, creating vertical walls of water that can snap a vessel in two. This storm is a hybrid, a cyclone with hurricane-force winds, but no warm, calm eye to offer a moment of relief. It's a relentless, cold-hearted engine of chaos. In the chaos, tiny human details carry the weight of the world. A rosary is looped around a throttle lever, a quiet prayer against the screaming wind. A rescue swimmer, dangling from a hoist cable, snaking like a live wire, flexes his frozen fingers, fighting to keep the blood flowing, his eyes fixed on the maelstrom below. Taped above the forecaster's desk is a scribbled note. Say what they need to hear, not what fits the box. Then, critical moments arrive like heartbeats. Inside the helicopter, warning lights bloom across the console. They're out of time. Out of fuel. They won't make it back to shore. The pilot turns the craft, and the engines begin to cough. The next moment, they are in the cold, black water. Emergency strobes ignite, tiny sparks in an immense darkness. Now, years of training become a desperate act of faith. Aboard the Asterisk, Tamaroa Asterisk, the crew lines the rail, their eyes burning with salt and fear. A rescue swimmer prepares to step off the deck into a world of violent peaks and bottomless pits, trying to time a jump into a trough that could just as easily be a grave. Farther out, another longliner's last known position pings on a screen, and then silence. The ship vanishes from the map. There's no explosion, no final cry, just an absence. A void that roars louder than the storm itself. As survivors bob in the churning, steel-gray canyons of water, the cutter circles, a lifeline in an ocean that wants to swallow them whole. But the storm isn't finished. It's massive. West drifting core is now turning back, taking aim at the coast. It's throwing a tidal surge that will rewrite the shoreline, bringing the fury of the open ocean to the land. This is no longer just a storm at sea. It has come for the coast, and the clock is not slowing down. The storm wasn't just one thing. It was two wars fought at once. one offshore, against the ships. The other, a brutal siege on the coast itself. In New England, the Atlantic went airborne. Breakers didn't just crash. They climbed, scaling seawalls, and pouring into streets that fizzed like soda with a mix of salt and sand. Houses, ripped from their foundations, began to drift like lost barges. The same monstrous system that had swallowed the horizon was now clawing at the windows and doors of families huddled inside, listening to the world being torn apart. Out in that chaos, 3 dramas unfolded. On the deck of the Coast Guard cutter Tamaroa, crewmen hauled hypothermic airmen from the churning, scum-lined water. Their job wasn't done. Just as they secured one life, another call came. A sailboat, the Satori, was being tossed around like a wet matchstick, its mast drawing frantic, desperate circles in the sky. It was a race against a clock that was already broken. For the rescue swimmers, the ocean was a physical enemy, battered by waves, bruised by debris. They'd go back into the hoist, again and again. Their hands would stop shaking from fear only to start shaking uncontrollably from the biting cold. They went. Anyway. Meanwhile, back on land, a forecaster stared at his screens, his eyes redrimmed from exhaustion and disbelief. The data was screaming at him. But the official language, the accepted terminology, felt like a whisper. He had to break protocol. He typed the words, hurricane force winds. Even though technically, this wasn't a hurricane. Phenomenalcius laughed threatening. He knew the rulebook didn't have a chapter for this thing. He was watching the very language of his profession being rewritten in real time, forced into existence by the sheer violence of the storm. This was the core of the problem. The system's classification was a mess. How do you issue an alert when a winter nor'easter suddenly grows a warm core and an eye, like a tropical cyclone? The categories, the neat little boxers they used to define storms, simply didn't fit this beast. The confusion hampered the warnings. Out at sea, forecasts still traveled by teletype and radio, but not every boat was listening. Some didn't have emergency beacons, the EPRBs that could scream for help. For others, it was already too late. There was no one left to even listen for a rescue. In the background, a new era of technology was watching, waiting. Satellites tracked the ocean as it bulged and breathed. Scatterometers could measure wind speed over the water, and altimeters could measure wave height. The data existed, but it wasn't yet fully baked into the operational models the forecasters relied on. They could feel that gap, that missing piece of the puzzle. It was like feeling a cold draft coming from under a locked door. You know something on the other side, but you can't see it clearly. But amidst the science and the system failures, this was a story about people. It was a family in a coastal town, stacking precious photo albums on top of the refrigerator, praying the floodwaters would stop rising at the stove. It was the docks in Gloucester, falling into a deep, heavy quiet that everyone understood but nobody dared to name. It was the deck of the Tamaroa transformed into a makeshift triage center. A line of shivering survivors wrapped in wool blankets, their saviors standing by in steel-toed boots, the salt spray freezing on their faces. Then, slowly, a shift. The storm's core began to weaken, its westward drift stuttering to a halt before making a final, agonizing turn to the north. The storm would eventually leave, but the changes it carved into the landscape and into the minds of those who fought it would remain forever. A single, mournful blast from the cutter's horn echoed across the gray, exhausted water. Back in the weather office, the forecaster finally leaned back in his chair, his eyes glassy. The storm was ending, but his work was just beginning. He knew the post-mortem, the review of what went wrong, would have to be brutally honest. It had to be. The water has fallen back, and the sky has forgotten it was ever angry. In Gloucester, Massachusetts, the empty berths where fishing vessels should be tell a story of silence and loss. Inside a church, every pew is filled. On the deck of a Coast Guard cutter, survivors stare at their own hands, as if they're tools borrowed from someone else. And in a quiet weather forecast office, a whiteboard covered in erased equations has become a ledger of what went wrong, and what must never, ever go wrong again. This wasn't just any storm. It was the perfect storm of 1991. a meteorological monster that taught us a brutal lesson. The cost was measured in empty chairs at dinner tables. 6 men aboard the swordfishing boat Andrea Gale vanished without a trace. A pararescue jumper from a National Guard helicopter lost to the same sea he was trying to save others from. All along the coast, from Nova Scotia to Florida, homes were torn open, lives ripped apart by the surge, their absences await in the air. A story told not in words, but in the spaces they left behind. But out of this tragedy, a quiet revolution began. This storm changed weather forecasting forever, not with grand speeches, but with concrete, life-saving steps. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, immediately began to expand and harden its network of weather buoys. Before, stories of gargantuan waves were just that, stories. Now, extreme wave events became hard data, measurements we could see and track in real time. Our eyes in the sky grew sharper. Data from satellites, which could measure wind speed and wave height from orbit, was integrated directly into our forecast models. Instruments called scatterometers and altimeters became the daily eyes on a living, breathing ocean, giving us a perspective we never had before. This led to the creation of advanced computer models like WaveWatch. Suddenly, mariners and forecasters had a clearer, earlier picture of the sea state, turning terrifying surprises into predictable threats. The agencies themselves evolved. The Marine Prediction Center was rebranded as the Ocean Prediction Center, its mission sharpened by the memory of 1991. The National Hurricane Center began issuing advisories for storms that didn't fit the neat category of a hurricane. Words like subtropical and post-tropical entered our vocabulary, giving names to these hybrid monsters so they could never again sneak up on us without a label. But technology is only half the battle. The real change happened in how we communicate. Forecasters were encouraged to use plain language, to cut through the jargon and say what people needed to hear. Graphics became clearer, more direct. The goal was simple: make the warning understandable enough for someone to act. At the same time, safety culture on the water transformed. Emergency beacons, or EPA, Arabis, became standard. Survival suits, safety drills, and strict regulations weren't just suggestions anymore. They became part of the lifeblood of being a mariner. The storm's lessons settled into the lives of those who survived it. The forecaster, who tracked the storm's impossible path, now teaches new hires, writing a simple sentence on the board. When the box doesn't fit, change the box. A Gloucester widow stands on the breakwater, her hand on the cold stone of a memorial. Behind her, a new generation of children reads a plaque that names the storm, but more importantly, honors the names of the people. The ocean will always have another surprise for us. It will always build the next perfect storm. But what do we put between that storm and our Celsta? Buoys, the satellites, the better models, the clearer warnings, the habits that make us move before it escalate. That is the difference between a tragedy and a close call. That is the legacy of 1991. If you were moved by this story of how disaster forged progress, please subscribe to our channel. We share true stories that shook the world, because the warnings that matter most are the ones we learn from in time to act. Thanks for watching.